Nikki Lowe, and welcome to the Wisdom for Working Mums podcast show, where I share insights and interviews that support women to combine their family, work and life in a more successful and sustainable way. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Wisdom for Working Mums. I'm your host Nikki Lowe, and today we're talking about resilience, specifically emotional resilience. And as working mums, resilience is a key part of what helps us manage the juggle. But never more has resilience been needed than now. At the time of recording this in April 2020, we're 4 weeks into the quarantine of COVID-19, and we're in unprecedented times now, having to combine our work and motherhood in almost impossible ways. The things and strategies we may have used to maintain our resilience are really no longer available to us. So in this episode, I wanted to share some insights to help you navigate this time, because speaking to many working mums, the challenge at the moment is real and exhausting. But if you're not listening to this episode when it launches and during kind of the whole COVID-19 situation, this episode is still going to be really useful. It's going to give you insights into resilience that no matter where you are on your kind of mothering journey will be useful to you. And what I've decided to do is make these episodes much shorter because really, as working mums, we're already overwhelmed. But at the moment, we probably absolutely won't be doing a commute. And also, we don't have much time to carve out for quiet time to listen to things like podcasts. I want to make these really bite-sized and easy for you to listen to and consume. But if you don't know me, I wanted to give a little insight into my background with resilience. So I've worked as an executive coach for the past 15 years. I'm an accredited executive coach, and I've had the pleasure and privilege of working for some of the world's largest organisations, supporting managers and leaders to navigate organisational life. And that has meant helping support them manage through mergers and acquisitions, restructuring and redundancies, economic crises, perhaps huge growth in an organisation and the uncertainty and kind of resilience that requires, but also things like returning from maternity leave and personal challenges, and really helping support them to manage and lead through that change. Because in organisational life, we talk about something that's a military term, which is VUCA, which is when the V stands for volatile environment, the U stands for uncertain, the C stands for complex, and the A stands for ambiguous. And I don't think that term has ever been more appropriate than what we're trying to navigate at the moment. It definitely feels like VUCA. So my background as a coach, I've specialised in emotional intelligence and have over a decade now, really focused my training around psychological mindedness. So although I'm not a psychologist or a psychotherapist, my training has gone quite deep into kind of the psychological strategies that help support us. And with that, I focus on emotional resilience. So I've got a lot of tools in the tool bag and strategies and insights that I can share with you, that I will start to do that on this episode and share more in future episodes. But let's start with actually what is resilience. So the term that I like to use is it's the ability to recover from negative life experiences and become stronger while overcoming them. And I think that's a great kind of term for me, that actually it's about how do we recover, because we can't avoid negative life experiences, and the kind of positive psychology stuff that you might see out there about positive vibes only actually is really unrealistic and unhelpful. We are going to, unfortunately, throughout our life, have negative life experiences, and it's about our ability to be able to deal with that and become stronger whilst also kind of navigating it. And I think that's really useful for where we're at the moment with COVID. So why is resilience so important? Really, it's a buffer against stress. It increases our tolerance zone of what we're having to deal with in life. And it has positive impact on our happiness and engagement. And it also influences our ability to bring the best out in ourselves, even in difficult situations. And for me, these skills are useful because really I want to role model it for my children, give them the life skill of resilience. Because unfortunately, as much as we want to protect them against negative life experiences, we can't. Our role as parents is to help guide and empower them to navigate this with the tools of resilience. So what I share with you today isn't only useful for you, but is also useful for your family. So if we think about our natural resilience, whether we know it or not, whether we're conscious of it or not, we operate in a natural resilience zone. And that's based on our autonomic nervous system. And it works in this complementary way. So it has this kind of wave effect where we charge up and our sympathetic nervous system gets our resources ready to deal with a challenge or a threat. And our sympathetic nervous system really is about getting our heart rate up. We might notice our pupils dilate. It gets the blood pumping to our extremities, ready to kind of fight or run away from something. And it could be a situation such as giving a big presentation or having a difficult conversation or a perceived threat. And clearly in the current environment, there are a lot of perceived threats hitting our nervous system. And it's the sympathetic nervous system is what we would know as our fight or flight. And that system works in a complementary way to our parasympathetic nervous system, which kind of charges us down. And I like to think of the parasympathetic nervous system as almost like a parachute that gently and safely brings us back down to land and grounds us. It kind of slows our heart rate down, and it's what's known as our rest and digest system. And this is a complementary system that works brilliantly in our normal life, and it's designed to help us wave through life. But when we have a situation that really shocks our system, like COVID, we can operate outside of this natural resilience zone. And as working mums, our resilience zone was probably being tested to its limits prior to COVID hitting. So what we're now being asked to do is really increase our tolerance zone, because if we don't, we either might go into overcharged, where we go above our resilience zone and we become almost hyper aroused, where we're over functioning, we have higher anxiety, we might be hyper vigilant, or we might find ourselves beneath the resilient zone where we almost collapse and become undercharged and we become hypo aroused. So we almost like shut down and go into freeze. So what I wanted to share with you today is some insights to help increase our tolerance zone of resilience and keep us in a zone where we feel able to deal with whatever life's throwing at us at the moment. And there are absolutely things that we can do to increase our tolerance. And before we go into those, what I wanted to just say are that there are background strategies that absolutely support our resilience. And I don't want to insult your intelligence because you already know these, but I wanted to remind you that sleep, nutrition, movement, hydration, all of those things absolutely support our resilience. We will almost certainly know these, but are we actually doing what we know? So I just wanted to remind you those strategies are important, but that's not what I'm going to focus on today. I'm going to be focusing more on the psychological health and wellness aspects and what we can do from that perspective to support ourselves. So it's useful to know there's actually a process to resilience. And I'm trained in emotional intelligence and a resilience tool with an organisation called PSI. And what I use with my clients is an assessment tool that allows them to kind of assess their emotional intelligence and see how that impacts their resilience. And with that, we use something called the Thrive cycle of resilience. And this is quite useful because what it shows is that there's a process to resilience. And the first stage in the process is the survive stage. And this is really about our initial response to a situation. And normally we kind of are only temporarily in this phase because we then learn to kind of adapt and adjust and move on to the second phase, which is about adapt. And it's how we adjust to change and really do that without things getting worse. And it's a necessary stage before we move on to the third stage, which is about recovery. And in recovery, we talk about how we bounce back. But actually, I don't like that term. I like the term of bouncing forward because I don't think we can ever go back. And with the current environment, I don't think we will go back to how things were. I think we're going to be doing some stuff differently. So it's how we recover and bounce forward with that and move on to the final stage, which is about thriving, which is about how we grow and become stronger and wiser and more resilient as we go through this. So I think it's useful to know that there is a process. So as I said, the first stage is survive, the second stage is adapt, the third stage is recover, and the fourth stage is thrive. And my role on these podcasts and when I'm working with my clients is to help support people through that process, because we each have areas that we might be stronger or weaker in around these stages. And it's useful to understand some of the strategies that underpin it so that we can support ourselves with that. But I just wanted to talk you through some of the science behind our minds, because I think this is really, really important to understand when we're looking at our resilience. So our mind has evolved over millions of years and actually has 3 distinct evolutionary kind of stages. So our mind first started off, our brain, as this reptilian brain that was designed really for our survival and is all about the automatic and unconscious processes that keep our body working. So keep us breathing, our heart beating. It warms us up when we're cold. It cools us down when we get too hot. It tells us when we're hungry. Our sex system sits in this, so it keeps us reproducing. And that's known as our reptilian brain, because we share it with reptiles, and it sits at the very base of our skull at the top of our spinal cord. And as I say, it's really about our survival. And from that brain, we grew the next layer of our brain, because if you think about it, when reptiles are under threat, they might actually eat out their offspring, which clearly we don't as a species. And that's because we grew this next level of our brain, which is known as the mammalian brain that we share with mammals. And that's really the seat of our emotions sit. It enables us to have kind of social connection. It enables us to nurture and care for our offspring. And then from that brain, we grew what's known as our neocortex, which is the part of our brain that makes us really the thinking species, the Homo sapiens. It's where our planning, our deciding, our thinking, and our higher order executive functioning sits. And the reason that I'm telling you this is that our brains are actually hardwired as a don't get kill kind of device. They're there for our survival. Our brain isn't wired for us to be happy and thrive. Actually, we're hardwired to focus on threats, to focus on kind of negativity. We have a negativity bias, and we have this inbuilt survival mechanism. And it's actually a really great architecture that's kept us survived as a species for all these millions of years, but it's an outdated architecture. And how this works is that in our emotional brain, in our limbic system, we have this part of our brain that's called an amygdala. And the amygdala has a very specific role. Its role is to kind of scan our environment for potential threats. And if it sees a threat, it's hardwired to take our thinking brain offline. And I like to think of it as a thermometer. So if you imagine the mercury level in a thermometer, when we're scanning our environment, if it perceives a threat that it perceives as life-threatening, it literally is designed to take our thinking brain offline. It goes and does what's called an amygdala hijack, and it goes and hijacks those higher order kind of executive functioning area of our brain. And if you imagine if you were crossing the road and you go to step out and a car's coming, it's the part of the brain that would automatically pull you back onto the curb to stop you getting run over. And it does this by taking the thinking line off brain. So the thinking brain doesn't go, oh, I wonder what the velocity of that car is and how quickly I can cross the road and whether I can calculate whether I can do it in time or not. It basically takes that part of the brain offline to make a quick and dirty reaction for our survival. So our brain is designed to do that, and it's called the 6-second rule because it will take our executive functioning offline for at least 6 seconds. It isn't able to distinguish between a real and a perceived threat, or a threat that might be not to our physical safety. It is an architecture that still works in a way that if it was a saber-toothed tiger coming towards us. So At the moment, our amygdala is likely to be on high alert because everything that's going on in our system. It's likely to be on high alert because of everything that's going on in our environment at the moment. And that's not our fault. That's just how our brain is wired. And I think it's really useful to know that. But it is our responsibility about what we do with that if we want to thrive through difficult times. So our nervous system regulation is going to be key to this, to give us kind of the emotional agility to be able to increase our tolerance and deal with what we're facing at the moment. And that's really useful to understand, because what may have given us resilience before in our lives, and as working mums, we're absolutely going to be resilient. You know, we wouldn't be able to combine our work and motherhood if we didn't have a degree of resilience. But what may have helped us to feel resilient before might not be working now, either because it's not available to us or actually it's not appropriate for this situation. And for many of us, our resilience before might have been almost like an oak tree, where we're this strong, rooted tree that has this strong trunk and is quite rigid and able to cope. But that coping and the rigid approach might be, you know, we had particular processes or structures or habits that supported us. And as I say, they may not be available to us at the moment. And if they are, if you imagine a oak tree in a storm, it can snap. And I like to think of our resilience in the current time to be more like a palm tree. So a palm tree is thinner and doesn't look as resilient. But if you've ever seen a palm tree in a hurricane, wow, they can bend but don't snap. And I think that's a useful metaphor for what we're looking at the moment. And how a palm tree is able to do that is it has deep roots, just like a oak tree. But rather than having just a few deep roots, a palm tree has a few very thin roots. So it has lots and lots of thin roots that actually disperse across a bigger kind of area, which means that it is anchored to the ground in a more powerful way. And I think that might be a useful metaphor for us to think about, because if the strategies we once used aren't available to us, how can we create these almost small micro strategies, but lots of them, that give us new ways to respond and adapt so that we feel more flexible? And those are really around kind of some cognitive and some behavioural and some feeling strategies that we can use. And in coming episodes, I'm going to be giving you some bite-sized chunks of those for you to kind of absorb and build into your life. So hopefully this episode on resilience and understanding what resilience is and what might be going on at the moment is really useful. I would encourage you, if you want more information on this, to head over to the Wisdom for Working Mums website. So wisdom for FOR working mums mums.co.uk, and you'll be able to access some more resources around resilience. And if you get onto my email list, you'll automatically get sent some of those. But hopefully this insight has been useful, and I look forward to sharing some more in future episodes. If you've enjoyed this episode of Wisdom for Working Mums, please share it on social media and with your friends and family. I'd love to connect with you too. So if you head over to wisdomforworkingmums.co.uk, you'll find a link on how to do this. And if you love the show and really want to support it, please go to iTunes, write a review and subscribe. You'll be helping another working mum find this resource too. Thanks so much for listening.